very good morning, students. In the series of the skeletal system lectures on general anatomy, this is the last lecture and it is meant for the blood supply of the developing as well as the adult long bone. So I will tell you the blood supply of developing bones in a child, and then I will tell you about the blood supply of an adult long bone, and then very briefly I will also tell you the difference between the two types of the blood supply of a developing bone and the blood supply of an adult long bones. Now I move to the next slide to tell you about the blood supply of our developing bone. Now, in the blood supply of a developing long bone, there are the various arteries which supply the blood to the developing bones. Okay. Now, the main fact which you should keep in mind in the blood supply of a developing bone in a child, okay, or in a fetus even, you should know that there are the different sets of the arteries, okay, for the diaphysis, that means for the bone developed from the primary center, okay, or for the epiphysis, that means the bones develop from the secondary centers, okay. They are not the same arteries, there are different sets, okay. Now let us come first to what are the arteries which supply the blood to the diaphysis, that means the bone which has developed from the primary center, or still it is a developing bone, okay. Now, this diaphysis is supplied by the three different arteries, out of which the first artery is the nutrient artery. Okay, the first is the nutrient artery, okay, which goes through the nutrient foramina in the center of, almost in the center of the a long bone. Okay, and then the second set of the arteries are the periosteal arteries. So many arteries. They are the perias. Nutrient may be one or two, but the periosteals are many. Okay. And lastly, the diaphysis is supplied by another sets of arteries, many arteries. These are called as the metaphyseal arteries. And what is metaphysis? It is that expanded portion of the diaphysis which is facing towards the epiphyseal plate, this expanded part, okay, that expanded part of the diaphysis which is close to that of the epiphyseal plate, okay, and this metaphysis is an active site for the formation of bone, that you should first understand. Let's come to the first artery which is supplying the blood to a developing bone in the diaphysis, okay. It is the nutrient artery. As I said, it enters in the middle part of the bone, okay, diaphysis, okay, through the nutrient foramina, okay. This artery, after entering through the nutrient foramina, it reaches to the marrow cavity where it divides into an ascending and the descending branches, which further repeatedly divides in many branches. And these arteries are responsible for the nutrient artery for the supply of the blood to the marrow cavity in which the bone marrow is filled, okay, in a developing bone. Then these arteries, they also supply the bone, that is the diaphyseal bone, which has developed from the primary center, okay. So, and then they run towards the epiphyseal plate where they anastomose with another set of artery, what is called as the metaphyseal arteries, okay, metaphyseal. So, this artery is the nutrient artery. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the second artery which supply the bone developed from primary center or the diaphysis is the periosteal artery. Here, if I just put my pointer onto the periosteal artery, this small branch which is shown here is the periosteal artery. There are multiple periosteal arteries which are supplying the periosteum, and you know what is periosteum. It is a fibrous membrane which covers the outer surface of the bone. It is rich in blood supply, and these periosteal arteries are coming from the neighboring arteries or those muscular arteries which are getting attachment onto the bone surface. Okay. Now this periosteal artery, they may go deep also inside the compact bone to the superficial part of the compact bone or just deep to the periosteum. Okay. And they may also have an anastomosis with the branches of this nutrient artery which is supplying from the marrow cavity side. Okay. So there are multiple periosteal artery that you should remember. Now a developing bone in a child or in a fetus is very rich, okay, in periosteal blood supply. Okay, and if there is the periosteum is removed, that will also disturb the blood supply of a bone. So that part of the bone deep to the periosteum may show necrosis or death. Okay, that is also a very important because periosteum is quite rich in its blood supply. Lastly, the third artery which supply the diaphysis is the metaphyseal artery, and these metaphyseal arteries are also multiple, and they just enter the metaphysis or the expanded portion of the diaphysis, the terminal end of the diaphysis or the upper end and lower end which is expanded is called as metaphysis, and which is facing towards the epiphyseal plate where you get the actual bone formation, okay, which is taking place at metaphysis. And because of this region, it has to be very rich in blood supply. So metaphyseal artery, they supply to the rich area where the actually the bone development is taking place. Okay, but you should note that this metaphyseal artery, they are the though in this diagram I have shown that they are just having multiple branches, but when metaphyseal terminal branches come close to the epiphyseal plate, they turn back. That means they form the hairpin band. Okay, so there are multiple hairpin bands are seen. That means metaphyseal artery will go towards epiphyseal place and will turn back. Another very important fact which you should note is that the metaphyseal artery, they are end arteries. Okay, they don't anastomose with the neighboring hairpin bands. Okay, they don't anastomose. So if a metaphyseal artery which is close to the epiphyseal plate is obstructed by clot or by anything, then that means blood supply is interfered in this metaphyseal artery, that area of the metaphysis will die, will get necrose. Okay, okay, this may be emboli or this may be infections or a clot. Okay, that may obstruct these hairpin bands. Okay, because there is a band here, usually they are prone to get obstructed. So these are the metaphyseal arteries which are the end arteries. But you should note that this metaphyseal artery are not crossing to the epiphyseal plate. See this is the epiphyseal plate, which is the active site of the cartilage formation. It is not crossed by the metaphyseal. Why it is not crossed by metaphyseal? The reason is that the epiphysis is made up of the cartilage, that is to hyaline cartilage, and any cartilage is an avascular structure. Whatsoever nutrition goes to the epiphysis, to the chondrocyte sites which are there, to the formation of the fibers, okay, they it is has to go through the diffusion. So the chondrocytes, they get their nutrients as well as oxygen supply through the this diffusion of the nutrients from this metaphyseal artery on this side as well as on the epiphyseal side by the epiphyseal arteries. Okay, so there is no anastomosis between this epiphyseal artery and the metaphyseal artery because it is separated by a cartilaginous plate or the epiphyseal plate. Now I will move to the next slide to tell you about the epiphyseal arteries. Now, epiphysis is that part of the developing bone, okay, or adult bone, that is the end of the adult, or you say developing bone. Okay, here it is the epiphysis, okay, the ends of the bone are epiphysis, which develops from the secondary center. The diaphysis was developed from the primary center, and this is developed which usually appear after the birth. Okay, the centers, they appear after the birth, first to one end and then later to another end, and they form the spongy bone of the ends. Now the remaining portion of the epiphyseal cartilage, okay, here remains, which is the called as now the articular cartilage. Now these arteries which supply this developing bone at the ends they are the epiphyseal artery, and they are also multiple, not a single, just like a nutrient artery, one or two nutrient artery are there, but epiphyseal are multiples, okay, and they go to the base of the expanded portion, and they go deep inside the epiphyseal bone where they supply the developing epiphyseal bone. Okay, so as I said that there are many epiphyseal arteries which enter through the minute foraminas at the end of the developing bones. Okay, and there is no anastomosis. I have already covered this point that there is no anastomosis between the metaphyseal and the epiphyseal artery, that because there is the presence of an epiphyseal plate between the two, which is an avascular structure. Okay, now I will go to a slide, okay, just to tell you what is the blood supply of a means say adult long bone. Here we complete the blood supply of a developing bone, okay, from fetus or from a child. Okay, now here the two sets of the arteries you have learned. For the ends, both the upper end and lower end, there are multiple epiphyseal arteries which supply the ends of the developing long bone. And for the diaphysis or the shaft of the developing bone, there were three different sets of the artery: nutrient arteries, periosteal arteries, and the metaphyseal artery. And remember that the metaphyseal artery are the end arteries, and there is no anastomosis between the epiphyseal and that of the metaphyseal artery. They are quite separate because there is an intervening, okay, epiphyseal plate. Now we will go to the see the uh, adult blood supply, okay, and then the differences between the two. Okay, now in this slide, this is showing the blood supply of an adult long bone. Okay, now if you will see it carefully, the side, you will see that in this diagram the sets of the blood vessels are same. That means there is a nutrient artery which is going inside the marrow cavity through the nutrient foramina. Then there are the periosteal, multiple periosteal arteries are there. Then there are the metaphyseal arteries are here, and then epiphyseal arteries are there. Okay, so same sets of the blood vessels are there. Only difference is that since this bone has completed its ossification, okay, so that there is no existing epiphyseal plate, and because this epiphyseal plate, okay, that means there has occurred the fusion between epiphysis and diaphysis, so no epiphyseal plate, so no longer this bone is growing. This is an adult bone, and the junction between the metaphysis and epiphysis at the site of presence of the epiphyseal plate here is represented by the epiphyseal line. So this is a adult long bone, and here the difference, if you see here, here will be that nutrient artery will be as such, there is no difference. It is the main artery for the blood supply of an adult bone, but the periosteal artery, which were supplying a major part of the periosteum and part of the superficial compact bone deep to the periosteum, is no longer that profuse. Okay, the blood supply of periosteum is not as strong as it was in a developing bone. So is true for metaphyseal artery, because now the formation of the bone is not the function of this metaphysis in an adult bone. So the metaphyseal arteries are not that, I mean to say, profuse. Okay, many are not there. Okay, and then another important difference which you will notice here in the adult long bone, okay, is that there is a free anastomosis between the metaphysis and epiphyseal artery passing through this epiphyseal line. So there is no separation here between epiphyseal artery and metaphyseal artery, and no longer this metaphyseal artery, they are the, I mean to say, end arteries, okay. They are not, no, the U-turn bands or the hairpin bands are seen in the metaphyseal artery, as they are now freely anastomosing with each other. Now, since the nutrient foramina direction depends on the growing end of the bone, as we have learned in the last, I mean to say, video. Now, it is always to the opposite. That means the nutrient foramina is directed always opposite to the growing end. If suppose in this long bone, the growing end is the lower end, that's why the nutrient artery is going towards the upper end. That means foramina will be directed towards the upper end. So this completes the blood supply of a developing bone as well as the blood supply of an adult long bone, and I have told you about the differences between the blood supply of the two different bones. Thank you very much.